The December wind howled through the empty streets of the city, biting at any exposed skin without mercy. 7-year-old Elena huddled beneath the flickering street lamp on Meridian Avenue. Her thin cotton dress, the only thing separating her fragile body from the freezing air, doing almost nothing to shield her from the relentless cold. Snow accumulated in her dark hair, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that should have alarmed anyone who saw her dot in her trembling hands. She clutched a crumpled note, its edges worn from constant handling. The words were simple, brutal in their honesty. No one's children. Her mother had written it 3 days ago, before leaving Elena at the train station with nothing but the clothes on her back and $50 that had quickly been stolen by an older boy. Elena's mind drifted to memories she desperately tried to suppress. The crowded apartment, the shouting, the feeling of being a burden. Her mother had been struggling with addiction for years, and Elena had learned early that she was more of a responsibility than a blessing. The note wasn't meant to be cruel. Elena understood that now. It was her mother's way of saying goodbye, perhaps even setting her free. But freedom felt a lot like dying. Her stomach growled, a hollow, painful sound. She'd eaten nothing but a stale bagel she'd found in a dumpster that morning. The cold made thinking difficult. Her mind moved in sluggish circles. She wondered if anyone would even notice if she stopped moving, if she simply lay down in the snow and let it cover her completely. The streets were mostly empty at this hour around 8 in the evening. The few people who passed glanced at her briefly, then quickly looked away as if poverty and desperation were contagious. An older woman hurried past with her shopping bags, never making eye contact. A businessman in an expensive coat stepped around Elena as though she were an obstacle on the sidewalk. Not a human being. Elena pulled her arms around herself more tightly, trying to conserve what little warmth remained in her small body. She had stopped crying hours ago. Her eyes were dry, her cheeks raw, her spirit fractured. She was invisible, she decided. Not just forgotten invisible. To the world she didn't exist. It was at this moment, when despair had completely consumed her, that she heard footsteps slowing down. Someone was stopping. James had been walking home from the community center where he volunteered as a social worker, lost in his thoughts about a difficult case, when something made him pause. It was a feeling more than anything, an inexplicable pull toward the small figure hunched beneath the street lamp. In his 43 years, James had learned to trust his instincts. He'd spent 2 decades working with children in the foster system, had witnessed the worst of human cruelty, but had never lost his belief in redemption and second chances. He was a tall man with kind eyes and graying hair, the type of person who seemed approachable despite his size. He turned and walked back toward the girl, his heart already heavy with what he suspected he would find. "Hello there," he said softly, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. His movements were slow and gentle, careful not to startle her. "My name is James. What's your name?" Elena flinched at the sound of his voice, unsure whether this was a threat or a rescue. She'd learned not to trust adults. Adults were dangerous, unpredictable. They could smile and hurt you simultaneously. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: genuine concern. Not pity, which she despised, but actual concern for her well-being. "Elena," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. James noticed the crumpled note in her hands and gently reached for it. She didn't resist as he unfolded it and read the devastating message. His jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained calm, composed. He'd seen notes like this before, the desperate final words of parents who felt they had failed their children, who couldn't envision any future except one where their absence was preferable to their presence. "I see," James said quietly. "That must have been very difficult to read, Elena." She nodded. Not trusting herself to speak, James removed his own coat, a heavy wool blazer that was far too large for her, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Elena felt tears beginning to form, tears she'd thought were spent. She buried her face in the collar of his coat, which smelled like cedar and safety. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. 3 days, Elena whispered. James closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. 3 days in this cold. This child could have died. He held out his hand to her. "I have a car parked just around the corner. We're going to get you somewhere warm, and we're going to get you some food. Does that sound all right?" Elena looked at his hand, then up at his face. In his eyes she saw no judgment, no disgust, no impatience. Just unwavering kindness. Slowly, she placed her small hand in his, and he gently helped her to her feet. "You're going to be okay now," he said. "I promise." As they walked toward his car, James already knew that this chance encounter would change both of their lives forever. Apartment James took Elena to his modest but immaculate 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building with elevators and good heating. To Elena, who had lived most of her life in cramped, cold spaces, it felt like a palace. James showed her to the smaller bedroom, which he'd apparently already set up with the basics: a bed with soft sheets, a small dresser, and a window overlooking a park. "This is yours," he said simply. "This will be your room for as long as you need it." While Elena stood in the doorway, overwhelmed, James went into the kitchen and began preparing food. He worked methodically, warming up soup he'd made the day before, toasting bread, pouring milk. He worked in a way that suggested he'd done this before, not rushed, but deliberate. Understanding that sometimes the way you do things matters as much as what you do. They ate together at his small dining table, and Elena found herself eating more slowly than she wanted to, forcing herself to be careful even though every fiber of her being wanted to devour everything in front of her. James didn't push her to eat more. He simply sat across from her, eating his own meal, allowing her the space to regain some control. After dinner, he drew her a bath warm water with gentle soap that smelled like lavender. Elena had been so accustomed to cold and filth that the warmth felt almost painful at first, a sensation that gradually transformed into relief and comfort. James left her privacy but stayed nearby, leaving clean clothes on the bathroom counter and listening to ensure she was managing. That night, as Elena lay in the clean bed with fresh sheets and multiple blankets, James sat beside her. He didn't speak much, just sat there quietly while she cried deep, body-shaking sobs that released days of fear and trauma. When her tears finally subsided, he reached down and gently smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I know you've been through a lot," he said softly, "and I know it might be hard to trust anyone right now. But I want you to know that my job is to take care of you. Your only job right now is to rest and heal. Can you do that?" Elena nodded, her eyes already growing heavy. She watched as James stood to leave, and instinctively she reached out and grabbed his hand. He paused, understanding what she needed. He returned to the bed and lay down beside her, fully clothed, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could feel his presence. Elena fell asleep with her small hand still holding his, and for the first time in years he slept without nightmares. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. James enrolled Elena in school, something she'd missed for months. He helped her with her homework in the evenings, sat with her during the difficult conversations about her mother, and allowed her to set the pace for trust. There were nights when she had panic attacks, when the old fears would resurface. James would sit with her, breathing slowly and steadily until her own breathing synchronized with his. One evening, about a month into her stay, Elena called him Papa by accident while they were doing dishes. The word slipped out unplanned and immediate. James stopped what he was doing, turned to look at her, and asked gently, "Would you like to call me that?" Or would you prefer something else? Elena looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. Is that okay? It's more than okay, James said, and he pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. I would be honored. 6 months after that first winter night, Elena and James stood in a courthouse with a social worker named Patricia, who had been instrumental in facilitating their bond. The adoption papers were simple, a few signatures, a few stamps, but they represented the completion of a process that had begun under a street lamp on Meridian Avenue. The judge asked Elena if she understood what was happening, if she truly wanted James to be her father legally. She answered with a confidence that made Patricia smile. Yes, Your Honor. James is my papa. He took care of me when no one else did. When it was official, James lifted Elena into his arms and spun her around, and both of them were crying tears of joy this time. Tears that tasted like hope. Life with James was a revelation for Elena. She'd never known what a stable home could feel like. James had taught her that predictability was good, that routines provided security. Every morning they had breakfast together. Every evening they cooked dinner as a team, with Elena standing on a step stool beside him. Every night, without fail, James would tuck her into bed and tell her he loved her. School became less terrifying. With James's encouragement and support, Elena began to excel academically. Her teacher noted a remarkable transformation in her demeanor from a withdrawn, anxious child to someone who participated in class, who raised her hand, who believed she had value, but the trauma didn't simply disappear. There were still difficult nights when Elena would wake up gasping, caught in nightmares where she was back on the street, cold and abandoned. James would come to her immediately, holding her until she was fully awake, reminding her that she was safe, that she was home, that she was wanted. There was a day, almost a year after the adoption, when Elena asked James about her mother. It was a question he'd been expecting, and he handled it with a careful honesty that had become the cornerstone of their relationship. She loved you very much, James told her as they sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. I believe that, Elena. I don't think she abandoned you because she didn't love you. I think she did it because she was so broken and so convinced of her own failure that she thought you would be better off without her. That was her pain speaking, not the truth. Do you think she's okay? Elena asked, her voice small. I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know that what happened wasn't your fault. Your worth as a person was never determined by whether she could take care of you. You always had value. You always mattered. Elena leaned against him, and together they watched the sky change colors, marking the end of another day, a day of safety, of belonging, of being wanted exactly as she was. 5 years later, Elena sat in James's office at the community center, helping him organize files. She was 12 now, still small for her age, but strong. She'd grown into herself with James's love as the foundation. And while scars remained, they were scars of survival, not of defeat. James had been nominated for a Community Service Award, and the award ceremony was next week. Elena was going to attend, and she decided to do something she'd never shared with anyone but James. She wanted to speak. She wanted to tell her story. Are you sure about this? James asked her, not for the first time. It's okay to change your mind. I'm sure, Elena said firmly. I want people to know that it's possible, that even when you think everything is lost, there are people like you. There are people who notice. There are people who care. James came around his desk and pulled his daughter into his arms. At nearly 48, he'd never thought his life would take the turn it did that December evening. He'd always wanted children, but circumstances had made that seem unlikely. And then Elena appeared beneath a street lamp, and his life became infinitely richer, infinitely more full of purpose. I love you so much, he whispered into her hair. I love you too. "Papa," Elena replied, and the words so simple, so profound, felt like a miracle every single time she said them. The night of the ceremony, Elena stood backstage in a red dress that James had helped her pick out. She was nervous, but it was the good kind of nervous, the kind that meant she was about to do something important. When she was called to the podium, she took a deep breath and looked out at the audience. She could see James in the front row, his eyes already glistening with tears. 5 years ago, I was alone and cold, and I thought no one in the world wanted me, Elena began, her voice steady. I thought I was invisible. But then someone saw me. Someone chose me. And that someone is James Mitchell, the man I'm honored to call my father. His award isn't just for the work he does with other children in crisis. It's for believing that every child, no matter their circumstances, deserves to be cherished and protected. He didn't just save my life that night. He showed me that I was worth saving, that I mattered, that I deserved to have a family. She paused, fighting back tears. To anyone listening who has ever felt forgotten or abandoned, you matter. There are people in the world like James who are looking for you, who are ready to love you. Don't give up. As she stepped down from the podium, James was there to meet her, pulling her into his arms, both of them crying openly. In that moment, surrounded by the applause of hundreds of strangers, they were only aware of each other, the girl who had been abandoned beneath a street lamp, and the man who had whispered, "You're mine now," and meant it with every fiber of his being. The cold and the loneliness were long gone, replaced by something warm and permanent and real. Elena had learned that families aren't always born. Sometimes they're found. Sometimes they're chosen. And sometimes, when you're at your lowest point, a stranger kneels beside you and gives you the greatest gift of all, the gift of belonging. From that street lamp to this moment, Elena's journey had been one of transformation. And it had only been possible because one man had decided to notice, to care, and to love her unconditionally. That's what family really means.